This is Dr. O.G. Whiz, world-famous comma hunter and super expert on commas in general.
Thank you. Whoever you are, yes. I've hunted commas all over the world. And let me tell you, I've found some commas in some pretty strange places. You know, some people think it's wrong to hunt commas unless you're a teacher. But the fact is, a comma in the wrong place can cause a lot of trouble. We'll take this big one, for example. I found it hanging outside of a sentence, trying to take the place of a period. Can't do it. I did it a favor by bringing it inside the sentence. All commas belong inside sentences. Let me introduce you to Horace T. Punctuator, the inventor of the comma. If Horace could speak,
Comma.
he would say,
Comma.
there really isn't much to it. In fact,
Comma.
Horace got the idea for the comma while watching an old-fashioned melodrama. But I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a moment. First, hear this. I'm going to show you just 2 ways in which you can use commas. That's all, only 2. And if you practice these 2 things, it should take care of the majority of your comma problems. Here they are. Notice that my fingers never leave my hands. There they are. Asides and betweens. You don't know what those terms mean? Well, don't worry about it. In this film, we're going to concentrate on asides. Now, what is an aside? Well, just watch some of this melodrama.
Aha!
Oh, Squire Knotworthy, what are you doing here?
I heard about your trouble.
Little does she know that I am the cause of that trouble.
And I came to help.
Did you see that gesture? That is an aside to the audience. In melodrama, when you want to give the audience a little extra information, it's called an aside. The aside is something in addition to the main part of the sentence, and it tells a little bit more about what's going on. Watch now for the asides.
I'm sure that your friends, whoever they may be, will come to your rescue.
I thank you for your sympathy. If that is what it really is. But I think I can solve my own problems.
The grammar experts have other names for asides. What is it they're called?
Parenthetical elements, or sometimes non-restrictive subordinate clauses.
Oh, well, I just call them asides. You know, some things added on the side, asides. If you look closely at people in conversations, you can often see them make asides. Or they don't put their hand to the side of their mouth. But if you watch very carefully, you can spot 2 asides in this ordinary conversation.
I saw your neighbor, the one with the bleached hair at the supermarket yesterday. I haven't seen her for, let me see, about 3 weeks.
Did you spot the 2 asides? The one with the bleached hair and, let me see. Well, so far, we've only seen asides in conversation. However, Horace T. Punctuator decided that he wanted to use asides in some of the sentences he was writing. At first, he did it this way.
When you see Helen, my sister, please tell her to...
Wait. There was something wrong with that method. The person reading the sentence later wouldn't see Horace moving his head aside. And then, Horace thought of this great idea. He made a dot for a tiny little head, and then showed that he was moving it aside. He put one where he turned his head aside, and one where he brought it back. And there it was right on the page. Horace had taught the world to enclose the aside in commas. Today, anybody can do it. If you want to, you can even do it in a melodrama.
I wish Jack, that handsome fellow, were here now.
Your friend, I do believe, is not dependable.
If only my father, whom I dearly loved, were here to advise me.
Commas might even enclose the asides in ordinary conversation.
I saw your neighbor, the one with the bleached hair, at the supermarket yesterday. I haven't seen her for, let me see, about 3 weeks.
An interesting thing about asides, if you leave them out, the sentence still makes sense. Watch.
I saw your neighbor at the supermarket yesterday. I haven't seen her for about 3 weeks.
See what I mean? The aside is something extra. We have, you will notice, been using 2 commas every time. Can we ever enclose an aside with just 1 comma? If you ask me, the answer is yes. Why? Because all commas belong inside the sentence. So if you ever have an aside at the beginning or the end of a sentence, it only takes 1 comma to separate it from the rest. Now, I'll demonstrate. Here's an example of an aside in the middle of a sentence. The answer, if you ask me, is yes. Now, here's the same aside at the beginning of a sentence. If you ask me, the answer is yes. And now, here's an aside at the end of a sentence. Blondes have more fun, they say. And that's all you need to know about punctuating asides with commas. This is conceited Connie. She is so conceited, she never encloses her asides with commas. She thinks we can read her mind. But we can't, so nobody knows what she's trying to say. This is the way she writes a sentence. No commas must mean no asides. So this is the way one of our actors might read her sentence.
People I like not, those I dislike, like me.
Is that what you meant to say? Well, I didn't think it was. How can the reader know where the aside is if you don't put the commas in? Put the commas in. Now we can read it the way you meant it.
People I like, not those I dislike, like me.
If you practice just one thing, many of your problems with commas will disappear. Just learn to recognize what is the main thing you are saying and what is a side remark. Then enclose the side with commas. What is it you want to say?
John is noisy.
That's the main thing you want to say. John is noisy. How many Johns do we have in here? Uh-huh. Could you add a little something extra to help let us know which John you mean?
I could use an aside.
Try it.
John, the one on my left, is noisy.
Now, if you were writing, we couldn't see you point. How would you do it if you were writing?
John, the one on my left, is noisy.
All right. John, be quiet. Helen, don't be a squealer. Now, everyone, let's pretend that you have commas on your hands. Let's read the following unpunctuated sentence and then pick out the aside together. Ready? Let's do it. Squire Notworthy, the fiend, was up to no good. How did we know that the fiend was extra information and therefore an aside? Because you can leave it out and the sentence still makes sense. And what mark do we use to enclose asides?
Comma.
Right. Now we get into some tricky stuff. Remember, I'm still talking only about asides. But if you'll remember, there are other ways to gesture asides besides this. Remember the woman who touched her hair when she did an aside?
The one with the bleached hair?
And remember the one who just glanced aside?
Let me see.
We have many ways of gesturing asides. We may point, for example. John, be quiet. Helen, don't be a squealer. If we address somebody directly when we are speaking or writing, do you know what that's called?
Direct address.
That wasn't so hard, but I call that an aside too. Why? Because if I just say, you are noisy, or John is noisy, those are simple, complete sentences. But if I add a direct address, it's like interrupting my main thought to point a finger at someone to whom I'm speaking. You, John, are noisy. It's almost like interrupting my thought to point a light at someone. John, I see you are behaving yourself. Helen, I am speaking directly to you. Are you listening, Mr. Smith, to what I am saying? I'm speaking to you, John. Dear sir, I am now addressing you. Would you, Mary, turn the lights on? Thank you for turning the lights on. Thank you, Mary, for turning the lights on. The direct address could be left in or left out. Since it's something extra we add, an aside, we always separate the direct address with
Comma.
or commas. Here are other ways we sometimes gesture asides. We nod our head yes, or we shake our head no. We often do. Yes, we often do. Yes and no, when they are used in a sentence that way, are asides. Well, after all, they don't contribute to my main thought. I could say, for example, that answer is correct. I'm just adding a little something extra for emphasis when I say, yes, that answer is correct, or no, that answer is not correct. But when I'm writing, how does the reader know whether I'm nodding or shaking my head?
Comma.
Yes, that is correct. Before or during our main thought, we sometimes tilt our head back to think, saying, let me see, or, well, or, Do you ever do that? Before you give the answer to a question, say, well, and then go on to state what you meant to say? That extra added thought is an aside. Needs a comma. I could say, for example, you may be right. I'm just adding a little indication of my doubt when I say, well, you may be right. If it's a thought added, it's an aside. Therefore,
Comma.
what if I leave the comma out? Suppose somebody asks me where water comes from. I'm not sure. But I think about it, and here's what I say. I thought well water came from the ground, that you had to pull it up out of the ground in buckets. Let's put the comma in and see what happens. Ah, that shows me it's a different kind of well. That well is a little bit of thinking I was doing on the side. Well, comma, water comes from the sky. So you see, you do need the commas. There's only one rule for asides, and it covers everything I've shown you. And that rule is, Anything that breaks into your main idea may be treated as an aside. Here's a main idea. We've been picking on John, so let's make it up to him with this sentence. I think that John is smart. I'm going to break into that thought with another kind of aside. If you think commas are hard, you should try breaking into a sentence this way. Whew. Okay. Now I'm going to break into this complete thought by adding a few extra asides. Someone tells me that John has been getting poor grades, to which my reply is, I think, however, that John is smart. Or someone claims that I once said that John was dumb, to which my reply is, I think now that John is smart. I can even add an extra aside at the beginning of the sentence. For instance, I think now that John is smart. Any addition, interruption, or qualification of the main sentence thought is an aside. That's all there is to it. Learn to pick out your main thought, and everything else is an aside. Separate all asides with commas, and you will have mastered more than half of the uses of the comma.